Immigration in the USA. So many in America during this time, there was a lot of widespread xenophobia, which meant that a lot of Americans simply hated immigrants just because they were immigrants. So there was a lot of reasons for this. Immigrants, Americans thought that immigrants were criminals, and Americans didn't like the cultural influences they were bringing, such as the Italians with like mafia-like influences, and the Americans didn't like the religion they were bringing, because during this time, a lot of Americans were Protestant or Catholic, and Americans did not like that immigrants weren't fitting in with their society and culture. So like the fact that immigrants couldn't speak their language, and also Americans did not like immigrants because Americans feared that immigrants would take their jobs, so they wanted to keep employment up. So there are a lot of policies during this time put in to restrict immigration. One of this was in 1917 called the It was called the Literacy Test, which made immigrants have to pass a series of tests on reading and writing skills on English. So this was put because America had that isolationist policy where they wanted to keep America American, so they wanted to keep immigrants out. And they did this to flush out all the people that could not even speak English, so that Americans could have a less immigrant-filled society. But they thought that it still wasn't enough, so in 1921 they input the Emergency Quota Act. So this reduced immigrants coming in by 3% for each country. So the population will only be 3% from each country. And then there was the National Origins Act in 1929, which reduced this 3% to 2%, and also banned Asian immigrants. So there was also the Red Scare, where it was for Americans, it was a fear of communism. So one of the key reasons why there was the Red Scare during 1919 and 1920 was because of the Russian Revolution in 1917. From Germany, we already know that Russia's revolution had inspired a lot of people in Germany to rebel and create another communist government. So America feared that Americans would get inspired by Russians rebelling and overthrowing the government to replace them with a communist government. So Americans did not want their capitalist government to be replaced by communism, and they suspected people with Russian origins simply because they were from Russia. There was also a few key reasons as to why the Red Scare was so popular. So there was simply patriotism, the fact that America was facing all these Eastern European countries and Germany, and there was also economic problems. So there was the fact that people had lost their jobs because since the war had ended, rearmament had already ended, so employment decreased significantly. So a lot of people lost their jobs, and this meant that a lot of people were desperate just to work for money. So employers had the ability to exploit people and just make working conditions and wages fairly bad. So this increased the Red Scare because this made communism more appealing for the working class. And there was also violence and worker unrest. So it began in 1919 in January, where workers started going on strike because of horrible working conditions, but they were treated as being violent. And in April 1919, there were over 30 letter bombs sent to imported people all over the USA to detonate on 1st of May. And a lot of these bombings were caused by anarchist groups which fueled media and just fueled the xenophobia in America. There was also the Palmer Raids. So the Palmer Raids first started in 7th November 1919, where over 1,000 suspected communists and anarchists were arrested. This simply showed that the Red Scare and xenophobia was widespread throughout America, and people were deported and arrested just because of the ideologies that they simply, just because people believed in communism and anarchism doesn't mean that they necessarily would act on it. So this just showed that America was very xenophobic during this time. And this is especially apparent during the Sacco and Vanzetti case. So on April 15th, 1920, 2 men were killed and about $16,000 were stolen in the robbery. On 5th of May, 2 men were convicted of this crime. It was Nicola Sacco and Bartholomew Vanzetti. So they were convicted because they were holding weaponry that came from the same crime scene, and the car had been suspected of being involved with the crime scene. So while there was 61 eyewitnesses that identified Sacco and Vanzetti that they indeed had committed the crime, there had been a further 107 eyewitnesses that actually supported Sacco and Vanzetti and gave them an alibi that they weren't in the crime scene. And it was pretty clear throughout the trial that the judge wanted to give the guilty verdict no matter what, so no matter the appeals, the petitions, the protests throughout the USA and internationally, Sacco and Vanzetti were proven guilty and were finally executed on 23rd of August 1927.